Now, a US president who goes off script, worrying the security establishment with off-the-cuff exemptions of emotional-driven outbursts. No, I'm not talking about Donald Trump, but his successor, Joe Biden, who stunned his own administration staff this weekend by apparently calling for Putin's removal as president of Russia. Let's take a look.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. God bless you all, and may God defend our freedom, and may God protect our troops.
The position of the US and any other civilized democracy is that who leads Russia is a matter for the people of Russia. To appear to advocate regime change can be a very dangerous and escalatory thing to do. Well, Biden's press team released this, realised this, and issued an urgent quote, clarification of the president's words. They said the president's point was that Putin cannot be allowed to exercise power over his neighbours or the region. He was not discussing Putin's power in Russia or regime change. That's from a Biden administration official. I'm not sure how much I believe that clarification. Well, let's talk through everything now with Greg Swenson, chair of Republicans Overseas. Welcome to the programme. This was clearly a mistake from Biden, one that has the potential to escalate things in the region. However, are we just supposed to be used now to American presidents who can't really stick to their scripts?
Well, Tom, you bring up a good point. I mean, there was a lot of criticism about Trump, some of which, I was critical of when he was speaking, shall we say, in an unfiltered manner or undisciplined. But that's exactly what we're seeing from Biden. And the difference is, Trump had a habit of getting in spats with people, of exaggerating, of hyperbole on issues that sometimes weren't that important, that people didn't really care about. Whereas when it was important, like when he was lecturing the Germans in 2018 about defense spending and about natural gas dependence on Russia, he was very disciplined, direct, and to the point, but disciplined. Whereas, this President Biden has really made things difficult for the country. It's not just something that's silly and everybody can roll their eyes and say, oh, that's old Joe, we're tripping on the stairs of Air Force One. These are really important things that have, implications that could have really negative outcomes. And it's not just the one on Saturday. He started the week with the press conference where he was very combative with a CBS correspondent and basically lied about his views on sanctions as a deterrent. He was proven, and there was tapes, obviously, that showed him saying the opposite. Thursday, he mentioned that, that he would respond in kind to chemical weapons. That's very escalatory. Friday, he said to the troops that he was visiting, you will see when you're there. These are 3 moments before the Saturday gaffe, just like the January 15th, incursion comment. These are 4 or 5 events that his staff and the State Department have had to dial back. Of course, they did the right thing. I think there was no choice to dial back, but it's not just the one event, and it's very troubling for Americans.
It's fascinating to me, sitting here, of course, in London, as you are, looking at world leaders, whether it's Macron, who's relatively young, Boris, who's not quite elderly. Of course, we've got many leaders across the Western world who seem to be fairly sprightly or in the prime of their life. America seems to be obsessed with seniority and electing people based on how many years they've done things for, rather than potentially how competent they may be.
Well, that's true, Tom, and that happens. And it's not necessarily the Americans that want that. Sometimes it's party politics. I mean, the Democratic Party basically engineered Joe Biden's nomination by turning the tide in South Carolina, after Biden had come in 5th in New Hampshire and 4th in Iowa. So this is not a candidate that was viewed positively. People want young people. Barack Obama was in his mid-40s when he was elected. Bill Clinton was 43 or 44. JFK was 43. George W. Bush was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. So it's not necessarily an age thing, but also, you look at what's happened with this administration. He was basically engineered in there by the party. And then you had a vice presidential candidate, which was a complete bow to identity politics when she has little to no knowledge or capacity for the job of vice president or especially of president. And she dropped out of the primaries before Iowa. So, she was polling in the low single digits. She was number 7 in South Carolina, which is a predominantly African-American electorate for Democrats. So, this is a failed candidate and a very unaccomplished politician. So by most measures. So, this is a troubling time when you lean too much on age or on identity, other identity politics or political groups. You get into trouble, and that's what's happened. And look at, it's not just the Democrats. The Republicans have, Mitch McConnell as the minority leader. You've got, and then back to the Democrats, Chuck Schumer, majority leader. He's pushing 80. Nancy Pelosi is over 80. These are, I agree with you, Tom. Young, 40s and 50s is what you'll see. That's what I hope we see in 2024.
And it's interesting there that you mentioned those more elderly Republicans as well as Democrats. I wonder, in this whole conversation, do the Republicans sort of undermine their own cause here? Might a Republican Party that had some other leading figures be more able to criticise Joe Biden over these gaffes? Because, of course, it's still expected that Donald Trump, of course, no spring chicken himself, right, and someone who has made gaffes in his career, many gaffes, is likely to be the nominee in 24.
Well, I think President Trump made the gaffes not because of his age, but because he's, unfiltered. And that was, had some appeal. That a lot of people were happy to see that someone was actually saying what they were thinking and appreciated his unfiltered nature. Again, it got him into trouble sometimes, fortunately not in very global, situations or geopolitical situations. They were usually relatively harmless. The press always got excited about it, but this is a little different here. So I'm not sure President Trump's age is as much of a factor. You saw the difference in energy levels during the campaign when President Biden was basically in the basement, which was a wise campaign strategy, by the way. I mean, his staff would do much better if they kept him from any unscripted press conferences or any unscripted speeches. Every time he goes off script, it's a disaster. So, and then back to your question, look, I think the Republican Party, actually develops younger people much better. If you look at the average age in Congress, for example, the Republicans is much lower. You've got Tom Cotton, who's in his 40s, Mike Pompeo in his 50s, Ron DeSantis, who's absolutely crushing it in Florida. I believe he's in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. So, you have a lot of young people that could be great alternatives to President Trump. I hope that one of them is. I think Ron DeSantis would be great. It would be the Trump policies, the Trump movement, without the baggage and without the undisciplined, conversation that we've seen from the last two presidents.
It'll be a fascinating primaries and of course the midterms before then. There's still a long way to go, although it feels like there's a presidential election all the time in America. I'm afraid we've run to the end of this conversation, but Greg Swenson, thank you very much for joining us this morning on The Briefing.